All right, sports fans, as prefaced, a fine and fun double dip of guesting on episode 46 of the Spicer Speaking podcast. Going to talk first some golf that was and some golf that soon will be with our friend. He's the senior editor and writer for Golf Digest, coming by way of a quarter century with the San Diego Union Tribune, much of which covering a lot of golf. He spells it with one D, unlike my brother Todd. Welcome, Todd Leonard, to the Spicer Speaking podcast. How's it going, man?
Going well, Judd. Good to talk to you, as always.
I appreciate your time. I know it'll be an active week for you at the Farmers Insurance Open. Got to ask, though, first, how's Wally? And you're going to need to explain that question.
Yeah, so I'll explain it. So Judd and I played at PGA West Stadium course a few weeks ago, and I introduced him to Wally. And Wally is my new wood putter. It's really out of a company called Greenwood in Canada. And it's basically these two guys got together in a garage and started making wood putters. And, if that sounds crazy and, just me throwing stuff at the wall with my putting, which is normally the case, it's actually a great little putter. And I've made a ton of putts with it in the last few weeks. So, but anyway, so we joked about it when we were playing with Larry Bohannon. Larry kept coming up with other names for Wally that were W words, and like Walenda and Winston and all this stuff. So it's Wally because it's a walnut putter, and it's this cool dark walnut wood putter.
It is aesthetically very pleasing flat stick, and you made many putts that day of varying lengths, and the honeymoon phase has not ended.
No, it didn't. Wally didn't behave well in the last round. Missed like 2 5-foot birdie putts, so that hurt. But I'm sticking with Wally. I made a 45-footer that day, and I made a 60-footer in the Torrey Pines Media Day a couple of weeks ago. So Wally's still in the bag, still in the starting lineup, and hoping that continues.
Well, speaking of rounds that did not have opportunity to see it in person at this year's American Express. I know you were out there for Golf Digest. I believe it was Saturday and Sunday. Correct me if I'm wrong. Enjoyed reading your pieces on golfdigest.com. Todd, Hudson Swafford, as I opened this program, describing and discussing, obviously the winner, grabbing his third career PGA Tour win, his second at this event, done it twice in 5 years. Your impressions of Hudson Swafford as our champion?
So it's an interesting thing for writers and media people when you're at an event. And, we root for, I think, and golf is a special sport in this, that we generally root for the dominating players. There every once in a while there's a off the radar story that comes up, a winner. I remember Johnny Vegas back in the day in the desert winning, and he was such a bright, fresh story. But generally people root for the top guys in golf. I think they pick their top guy and they root for him, a couple of guys. So when you have a board like you had yesterday at the American Express, where it's a bunch of guys either trying to get their first win, or they're journeymen, or they're just not that well known, but they're all really great golfers, of course. People kind of like roll their eyes like, oh man, this is another American Express like this, or another Hope, or in the tradition of all that that it hasn't had great winners always through the years. And when I say great, it just hasn't had name winners. And I kind of wrote about that on Saturday, that it just, they had such a good field this year, as good a field as they've had in a long time, probably, as far as names.
Yeah.
And yet, we ended up with 7 or 8 guys on the board on Sunday that, just a lot of people wouldn't know. So having said all that, then you get Hudson Swafford as the winner. And, still a lot of people in the golf world, or even watch golf fairly regular on TV, don't really know much about Hudson Swafford, right? He's won a couple of times. He'd won out there at La Quinta, but people don't really know that much about him. So, as a writer, I'm like, well, how are we going to, and believe me, man, on Sunday afternoon, I'm researching 5 different guys, and I kind of done this deep dive into Lee Hodges, and he actually, he won his club championship at like 14 years old. He's from very northern Georgia, like literally, like his high school is like a mile inside the Tennessee line. And he's beloved in his town of like 1,000 people. And so he would have been a good story, right? And I knew nothing. I remember I played golf this past Thursday and looked up on the TV in the clubhouse when we were making the turn. I'm like, who's this Hodges guy?
Right.
So anyway, so then you have Hudson Swafford win, and you think it's just kind of this, oh, it's his 3rd win and 2nd out in the desert, and that's cool. And I was looking at his record. He had gone through this terrible stretch last year of missing 10 of 11 cuts. So I thought, that'd be interesting to ask about. And then Doug Milne from the PGA Tour says, hey, just comment on your win. And he kind of tears up and says that his dad passed away a month ago. It was a little bit longer than that. It was early December. And you're like, oh my gosh, and not that those are always the greatest angles. But he just talked very eloquently about his dad and how his dad had guided him as a person and as a golfer. And the juxtaposition for me is that he has his 3-year-old son there, James, Hudson Swafford did. And James is just so excited. It's the first time he's ever been on site for a Hudson win, because Hudson won in 2020 when James was really little. So here he is with his son in his arms, and he's thinking about his dad who passed a month ago. And that was just it was a neat thing. I mean, it was something real in someone's life. And so my point being that you never know what kind of stories you're going to get out of these guys, even though they aren't names. But those guys want to win just as badly as John Rahm and Patrick Cantlay and all the other names that were in the American Express field. They want to win just as badly. Wins probably mean more to them in some ways than these big name guys, because it keeps them on the tour and gives them some security, them and their families. So, I mean, there's rarely a bad story or a bad winner on the PGA Tour. It's just kind of, people expect to see the big names all the time, and that just doesn't always happen.
It's fascinating how you frame that answer, Todd, because I think, and maybe golf is more specific to this than other sports, but there are different lenses. There's the lens of the tournament and the hosts and the city. And yes, they probably want John Rahm to win or Patrick Cantlay to win, because then John Rahm or Patrick Cantlay kind of they don't have to keep coming back to your tournament for 20 years, but pound for pound, they oftentimes will. There's the lens of the golfer, as you well described, that these guys deserve it or want it or work just as hard. And it might mean, pardon me, more to them than it would one of the top 10 golfers in the world. There's the lens of the fans, and there's the lens of the media. And our job is to tell stories. I mean, you and I are not necessarily out there doing an AP style, just give me the facts story. We want to tell a story. Personally, over the years, every time, I shouldn't say every time, but most times I have attempted to do that, turns into the Spicer jinx, and it happened again this year. My assignment on Friday was at La Quinta Country Club. La Quinta Country Club gets somewhat quiet after the big names leave on Thursday. That is the tradition, to have the stars there on Thursday. And so I generally end up picking up some guy at the turn that had a good round one somewhere and seemed that he could build on it at La Quinta Country Club. This year, my guy was Sam Ryder, and he started off great, and then the Spicer jinx set in. He was tied for the lead a couple times on Friday, but it's that same lens of I want to be able to tell a story, especially for a guy like that. We don't know that much about a guy like Sam Ryder, maybe even Hudson Swafford, although he's now won 3 times. I mean, for you, is that how you approach your coverage of a golf tournament? That you want to tell a story and maybe tell a story of a guy that we don't know that much about?
Absolutely. I mean, that's always been my goal, especially say here in San Diego, where, I've covered, I don't know, 20 something Farmers Opens or more. Especially early in the week, Judd, like you did on Friday. I mean, to me, that's our job, is to try to find, some nuggets, some people that, people generally don't know that much about. I got to tell you, I mean, that was a little bit easier, in some ways easier at the newspaper, in some ways not. So at the paper, I could go a little bit more off the wall with something like that. It's interesting now with digest, and especially on the web, is you're trying to balance good stories with interest and hits, right? I mean, that's the reality of the website. And so it's a little bit of a balancing act from that standpoint. Is it's really hard for us to do something on a really no-name guy. I mean, like Sam Ryder would probably not pass the muster if I'm pitched that to them at this point. He'd have to be like, I think, in the lead, and you said that he was pretty close to the top. So it's not like you were plucking him out of obscurity and he's midway in the field necessarily. But it's interesting with the web aspect of it, because we want to tell really good stories, and that's what I've been so impressed with being at Golf Digest the last couple of years is, despite working a lot on the .com side, they're not just looking for clickbait and good headlines, although that's certainly part of it. But we're still looking for good journalism and good stories, and it's not just all clickbait. But it just, when you're considering stories, you have to think about, who's going to read them, what's the interest going to be.
Right.
You can't just count on surprising people with a headline in the paper, if that makes sense.
Friends, for those good stories this upcoming week, the Farmers Insurance Open, or anytime, go to golfdigest.com to follow the work of senior editor and writer Todd Leonard. He's my guest on the Spicer Speaking podcast, talking a little more about the Farmers. Todd, it was back in the end of September when the shift, should I say date change, or more aptly day change? Of course, this week
Yeah.
is a very unique, super rare, don't want to challenge the eyeballs of the NFL respective championship games on Sunday. So you guys are going Wednesday through Saturday this week. To be honest, I kind of forgot about that because the announcement was a few months ago. Do you feel like a lot of people, fans, readers, maybe even some media are being suddenly reminded that, oh yeah, it starts on Wednesday this week?
Oh yeah. Yeah. This is, yeah. I mean, it's a unique situation, right? People are very conditioned to their professional golf being Thursday through Sunday, right? And certainly, on the West Coast swing, I mean, we've never really had a situation like this, other than going back to the Hope days when the tournament started on Wednesday, right? And had the 5 rounds. But this is unique, and it's an interesting situation. The Farmers Open and all its iterations through the years has been incredibly fortunate. They've had the date that fell between the NFC and AFC championship games and the Super Bowl, that down week. And there was one year where they went up against those for like a 1-year type thing, because there wasn't a break. Like the NFL went back-to-back weeks. I don't know what year that was, but so all of a sudden, because the NFL goes to 17 games, Farmers is in the middle of the NFC or the championship games. And it's tough, right? The PGA Tour has to, they saw it coming, but then it becomes reality. Farmers, you're in that date. Let's see what we can do with this, right? And so, and this came up. I mean, it's interesting because, like you say, I mean, it didn't come up until late in 2021 that this was actually going to happen. And so they've had a very short window, they being the Century Club and the planners, the stagers of the Farmers Open. They've had this pretty short window to try to adapt. I know for a fact that there are plenty of farmers executives who are not happy about this.
Oh,
You know, they're disappointed that they had to go to this date, but they're trying to make the best of it, and it doesn't look like it's going away for them. That we may see this into quite a few years. You know, now it's not just a one-off thing.
it's interesting. I mean, yesterday, and I kind of do this every year, secretly hope that the game or games basically opposing final round coverage of the Amex will be duds. And especially if there's a regional team, as there were yesterday. I mean, the Rams um, obviously were able to pull it off against Tampa Bay, but that can take even more eyeballs away from your tournament. And I was like, all right, 20-3, that's good for the tournament. Maybe people start clicking away. And then, of course, we know what happened in that game, and it
Right.
got dramatic and crazy and exciting. For you this week, you have not one, but two California teams that you would have been opposing
Yeah.
on Sunday. To me, it makes me think, why didn't our tournament do this many, many years ago? And of course, there was a time forever where this was a 5-round tournament, so that would not have been possible. But in recent years, it made me think, this is a smart move. This seems like a very durable and doable move, just to switch up one day. I know it's belying tradition and logistics and all those things, but if you don't have to fight the eyeballs, then don't fight the eyeballs.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and we know, Judd, I mean, what it probably has come down to is the fact that the American Express was on Golf Channel. And the difference being that, you know, CBS, you know, they have to make that switch because of CBS having one of the championship games. And so, you know, they couldn't physically do it. The only way was for them to switch networks, and it was considered. They considered switching to NBC, but ultimately they have a great relationship with CBS. You know, you've got, you know, Jim Nantz in your booth, you know, usually, and you know, that brings prestige, and CBS brings prestige to the tournament, and they've just had a long relationship with them. So they decided to go this other direction. I've been asked by quite a few people, you know, this has to just be, you know, totally damaging to the tournament's bottom line, because you're trading a Wednesday round for a Sunday round. Marty Gorsuch, the tournament director, is putting a really bright light, you know, shiny light on it, that, you know, their attendance, they have great attendance on Saturday. It falls off a little bit on Sunday. I personally haven't been able to gauge that. I think they get a tremendous amount of people on Sundays, especially with a good board. So that seems like a big loss to me. And because, as you said, nobody, I mean, I'm sure there's a ton of people in San Diego who are golf fans who don't realize this thing's starting on Wednesday. So I think it's going to be incredibly quiet out there on Wednesday for a first round of a tour event. We'll see, but I just think it's going to be really quiet. So, you know, I've asked Marty about how the financials are going to work. He's not really ready to talk about that. I would not be surprised if Farmers and the Century Club are going to get a decent supplement check from the PGA Tour on this, because they're all in that together, right?
Sure.
So, you know, and the Saturday finish, you know, I think is fascinating. What Marty has brought up is that he would not be one bit unhappy with a playoff, because this year they're on Friday and Saturday, excuse me, Judd, they're going to almost darkness with the rounds. They're not finishing at 3 o'clock like they normally have. They're going to almost 5. So to get into prime time, right? Well, they're going to go to almost dark on Saturday. And if there's a playoff, they might have one hole to play before it gets dark. And so then they would extend it to Sunday morning, and they'd get on TV, they'd have another day on TV well before the games have started, and they'd get their Sunday finish anyway.
Well,
So-
pray tell, Todd, and I'll ask you lastly, because I know you need to get to Torrey Pines to continue your coverage, I should say, of this year's Farmers Insurance Open. That actually sounds like it would be pretty cool and appease a lot of people. Larry Bohannon, he thinks that's kind of jinxy. He calls it the P word. Don't say the P word. You don't want to be fighting the sun out here in the desert on a Sunday.
We were going through that last night. Believe
Okay.
me, we were going through that last night.
Don't say the P word. I think it's happened over 20 times out here.
Yeah.
But if you do go to a playoff and it does go to Sunday because they can't finish in, I hope I'm not jinxing you. There were 2 guys in there. Who would you like to see in that playoff?
Ooh.
What's the story you want to write?
Ooh. Well, I mean, Xander Schauffele would be the story. Xander would be the story because San Diego guy, hasn't won in a while now, is really hungry for a win beyond the Olympics, of course, the gold medal.
Right.
But Xander would be the story. So Xander Rahm playoff would be pretty awesome. Number 1 in the world versus Xander, and really any of those, the top guys in the field, Xander versus DJ, Xander versus JT, Xander versus Patrick Reed. That would be fun. So, I mean, for me personally, both having covered Xander as much as I have, and his pedigree and his San Diego tie, I mean, Xander would be the best story in my opinion. So yeah, I think he's the guy that, and the thing is, Judd, that Xander had really struggled at Torrey through all these years, and then he played really well at the Open. Had a top 10 at the Open at Torrey last year, and so maybe he solved some stuff there. I know he puts a lot of pressure on himself, and has a lot going on that week. Those weeks are always hard. A Xander Phil playoff, that would be kind of cool too. Although I don't think Phil's going to make the weekend, but
I was going to say, after his showing out here, no slight toward our tournament host, don't think you're going to have to do too much research on the possibility.
No. If Phil can't score out there, he's not scoring at Torrey Pines.
Friends, whether it's a hypothetical playoff to read about or not, don't forget Wednesday through Saturday tournament this week. You're going to want to follow all year long, of course, Todd Leonard on Golf Digest, but maybe especially this week on his home turf in San Diego and at Torrey Pines. Follow it at golfdigest.com. Always a pleasure to visit, my friend. We'll look forward to getting back out there with Wally soon. Means I need to get a name for my putter. Until then, man, sorry I missed you out here in the desert, but I will look forward to reading your coverage all week long for the Farmers Insurance Open, golfdigest.com.
Thanks, Judd. I really appreciate you asking me to be on, and good to have the time together.
Appreciate your time, sir.